This program is sponsored in part by the National Catholic Society of Foresters. Hello and welcome to Looking at Social Justice. I'm Jim Grant, your host, and I am really glad that we are doing already our 38th program in which we try to look at social justice here in the Valley, the San Joaquin Central Valley of California, the issues that people face in so many different areas around that word, justice. Well, today we have once again, for the third time of our 38 shows, guests from Central California Legal Services. They serve the whole Central Valley in so many different ways. But today we have two particular guests, Barbara Ronsley and Bao Thao, who are paralegals at CCLS. And their topic today is their specialty, housing. We're going to basically look at 6 different matters, issues, concerns that they spend their work at CCLS over. But let's let them speak for themselves. Barbara, could you self-introduce just a little, and I'll add some details that I do know about yourself and about your commitment to CCLS.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here, and I'm Barbara Ronsley. I work with Central California Legal Services. I've worked there for 34 years now. My specialty is subsidized housing. I just want to mention that I am glad to be back here in the diocese. My 3 daughters graduated here from San Joaquin Memorial, Michelle, Jolene, and Bobby. So it's nice to be back.
How was the property different as you remember from the days with your daughters at school?
A little bit. It seems like there's more. Well, for one thing, definitely I don't remember a security guard.
That's a new addition.
So that's something that's different.
Well, I am glad that when you came in today, you could say that I've been at CCLS 34 years, which makes me feel like, gee, what have I been doing? I've only been here 30 years. So certain people like you and me, we're hanger-oners. We stay there.
We do, apparently. When I started at CCLS, I certainly had no idea that I would be there that long, but the work that I do, that's what's kept me there. I love helping people, and it's like a calling for me, I guess.
That is a beautiful way to put it. That's how I feel. Bao, tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to, as a paralegal, just what that means over at CCLS.
Basically the same thing, but thank you, Jim, for having us here today. My name is Bao Thao, and I've been with Central California Legal Services for a little bit over 14 years, but I've been in a nonprofit arena for a little longer than that, like over 20 years. I started with CCLS when the new wave of refugees came in, the Hmong refugees came in.
Yeah.
So that was probably like about 14 years ago as well. So, but you know, I have the passion to just help my community and give back to my community, and so that's why I'm still there.
And I noticed on your resume, it's not only at CCLS that you've been committed for these 14 years, but so many different Hmong and Southeast Asian agencies, organizations. Do you want to mention even 1 or 2 that are your, like another part of you that you are committed to do social justice for your own community?
I've been with Fresno Center for New Americans for a while, so they're still my go-to for my community. And along the way, I mean, I've done a lot of health stuff, like around CCLS, and so they're still one of our partners. I did start off with that, and then came to inherit a program. It's a Susan G. Komen in the Central Valley, and so just educating our partners, educating our community about how important that is.
Well, I am so glad that after having just had a great show recently with Tran Nguyen and Lupe Casares, we already had one with Nora Salazar Hernandez, that we are seeing two more great people from Central California Legal Services to tell us about what you do. So now to what you do. The first thing I'm interested in, and I think it's our main topic today, is exactly the Housing Choice Voucher Program, better known as Section 8. I know the word, don't really know much about it. So introduce us, beginning with me, to our viewers and our listeners. Barbara, what do you want to tell us about Section 8?
Okay, so first I'd like to give a disclaimer. The information that will be provided today is information only. It's not to be taken as legal advice. If there's any problems that you have, our viewers have, they would need to contact an attorney. Okay, and so the Section 8 program, it's a federal program. It's administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, better known as HUD. It's locally administered by the Public Housing Authority.
Preston Prince?
Preston Prince is the CEO there, yes. And tenants can apply for vouchers. It's usually what their rent would cost is about 30% of their annual adjusted income. It's for low-income persons, families, seniors, and the disabled. And the income guidelines is based on the area median income, which is people would probably qualify if they're 50% or lower than that. And that is done each year by the Housing of Urban and Development in all the regions in the whole country.
Whom is the subsidized housing, the Section 8, most of all intended for?
For the lower income persons, so that they can have safe, decent, and sanitary housing. That is really why it was started.
I'm going to go out and step into something. We don't have enough of that, right?
No.
Have we ever?
No, and at this particular time, there is such a shortage of affordable housing. People, not only just in Fresno County, but in other counties, have lost their vouchers because there was no available housing for them. So we really, one thing would be really good if we could build our housing stock of affordable housing.
This is what you are most involved in at CCLS?
Yes, my specialty is subsidized housing. Not just the voucher, but all areas of subsidized housing.
And what would it mean, this Housing Choice Voucher? Like, what is it?
The Housing Choice Voucher itself is a subsidy. A person applies with their local housing authority, and if they're eligible, there's certain income guidelines, citizenship, or eligible immigrant status, and no serious criminal activity. And then if they qualify, then the housing authorities will issue them a voucher, and then they can take that voucher anywhere in the county to any market. They don't have to live in a low-income housing, which we do have some low-income housing, but they can do market rates if they find a landlord that's willing to accept the voucher.
So what is it that CCLS's part, and particularly your part, and I suppose Bao's part, in this voucher program? Like, what is your particular task? What do you do?
Okay, what I do is, okay, so for instance, if I get a case where a client, I accept the person as a client, they may have gotten a notice, some type of notice. Either it's they could have gotten a voucher termination notice. Those types of cases, if after my investigation I see that the case has merit, then I will usually accept the case and I will represent the client. I will do my investigation. I will check out what the housing authorities is using for that allegation, for that proposal of the termination of the voucher, and then I'll prepare the case and I will represent the client at that hearing.
So CCLS is really on the ground floor, willing, as we saw in the previous program, over health issues, over bills, over insurance, over Medi-Cal, that you would be like a parallel program, but with housing issues.
Yes.
Especially yours, subsidized housing.
Correct, yes.
Now the second, I guess, question that is in our hope to cover a little is, what would be this housing assistance payment contract, which you say is HAP? So introduce us to HAP.
Okay, the Housing Assistance Payment Contract is an agreement between the housing authorities and the owner of the property. And that contract is required by HUD. That lays out everything about the issues. It's going to have the tenants' names. It's going to have the address of the unit that they will be living in. It will have the term of the lease, and it will have the amount of the rent that's to be paid. It will also say whether the owner will pay for utilities or those will be paid by the tenant. Now, if there are any changes to that, such as family composition or income of the voucher holder, then that would be reported to the housing authorities, and then the housing authorities would send out an amendment contract which outlined those changes. It could be a change in the voucher holder's portion of the rent, or if it's after the first 12 months and the landlord has asked for a rent increase and the housing authority has approved that rent increase, then that would show the increase in the market rent. It would show the portion that the voucher holder has to pay and the portion that the housing authorities has to pay, and it would show the effective date when that change takes effect.
So that is pretty much all that we would need to know about HAP?
The important thing about that is that if a tenant has a change in income or their family composition, that they report that timely to the housing authorities. Now, after that, they should get a new contract, a new amended HAP contract that shows those changes. It's important, if they have not received it, that they contact their caseworker, because if the changes are made, for instance, the rent is increased, the tenant's portion of the rent is increased, and the tenant doesn't realize that because they didn't get that notice, then they'll continue to pay the old portion, and then that will cause a problem, because at some point they're going to get served with a 3-day notice, which, depending on how much there is a change in the rent and the tenant can't pay it, that balance, when they get that notice, it could go into an eviction. And then that just escalates, because an eviction can cause the loss of the voucher. So that's important, that because it happens where the tenants either didn't get the notice, or it was misplaced, or something happened. Sometimes it gets lost in the mail. There's issues with mailboxes at some units, and they didn't get it, and so then they end up with a 3-day notice.
I have 4 possibilities I'm thinking of that might make something change, and see if these are possibly true. So if there's a new person added to the family, like a baby, or a new person moves in, would that, I'm thinking, make the rent go up or down?
Well, it depends. It just depends. If someone's added to the voucher, and that person has income, then it can go up.
But if it's a dependent,
If it's a dependent, a minor child, it's not going to go up. The change that could happen is that the voucher might increase. So say you have a 1-bedroom voucher, you then might be entitled to a 2-bedroom voucher.
oh, you say entitled, meaning it's not necessarily a negative.
No.
I mean, it might not work against you.
No.
It might upgrade you.
Exactly.
Then the other possibility is you suddenly get a little boost in salary. You just luck out that even in the economy like it is, somehow, I guess you've got to hand in your, I got a raise.
You do have to provide that information, and you need to do that in a timely manner. I believe most housing authorities give you like 10 days, but I am told recently by Fresno housing authorities they give you 30 days to report any changes in your income or your family composition.
And then one thing that I suppose would work to your theoretically help, you are making less. Somehow you are laid off, you are unable to work, you get cut hours. That would be, I'm supposing, working hopefully to help you be granted some grace on that you get a reduced rent or something.
Definitely. So you need to report that right away, because it does take the housing authority time to process the paperwork. So if you have a loss of income and nothing else has changed, then they will most likely reduce the amount of rent that you're paying.
So
Sometimes to zero. So I just want to say that
Oh my.
we had a client who came in, lost her job. I guess Social Security is pending, and so she went in and just had that conversation with her case manager, and it was reduced to zero until further notice. I mean, if she was to get a job somewhere else, or if the case was to be awarded, then they'll work from there.
This is very helpful to me because all I do know is how critical the issue is. That is almost like an epidemic of not enough housing, not enough affordable housing. Prices are crazy. People are not making enough money, and there's not enough housing regardless. There's just not enough. Now, switching to a third area that we wanted to cover is tenants' rights, but then they come with responsibilities.
Correct.
Ballparking that, Barbara, where do you want to enlighten us on tenants?
Okay, so the tenants have a right to have decent, safe, habitable housing and affordable housing. They also have the right to be properly noticed. If the landlord wants to have the rent increase, the landlord is required to serve a 60-day notice on the tenant and on the housing authorities. Now, that rent is not the increase, even though the owner has asked for an increase, does not mean that he automatically gets an increase. It means that the housing authorities will review it, and then they will decide whether they approve it or they do not approve it. If they approve it, then they send out again the housing assistance payment amendment, which shows the new rent portion that the tenant is going to pay and the market rent. And so they have some owners don't actually serve that notice on the tenants. They'll request it from the housing authorities, but they are required to serve that 60-day notice on the tenant as well, so that the tenant knows that this is coming up. Also, they have a right to be properly noticed if they are going to be asked to leave, if the tenancy is going to be terminated. In the first 12 months, which is a lease, they can only be terminated for what is called good cause, meaning that they have to breach the contract in some way. After the first 12 months in the voucher program, if the owner wants the tenant to vacate, a proper notice is a 90-day notice. It doesn't have to state any cause, but they do have to give 90 days.
What would be some more responsibilities of our tenants?
Okay, so the tenant, they're required to maintain the property according to the housing and quality standards. They are required to report any changes in their family composition or income. They are required to give a proper notice if they want to vacate. And normally that's a 30-day notice after the contract has expired, the lease period. If they're in the lease, they can't really just give a 30-day notice unless it's unless it's extenuating circumstances, like for instance, safety issues or something like that. There's a lot of criminal activity in the area. So they would have to get a mutual agreement, and that is signed by both the tenant and the owner, letting them out of the lease. But then it has to be approved by the housing authorities before you can actually leave. So the housing authorities they pretty much, everything has to be approved by them in this program.
And the tenant does have to let the Fresno Housing Authority inspect and come by.
Absolutely, they have to do annual inspections.
Annual.
Yes, and they are required to be there for those inspections. They are given notice by the housing authorities, and it's important for them to be there, because if they're not and they don't ask to have it postponed or whatever, and the housing authorities comes out, they may come out a second time, but if the tenant is not available, then they are most likely going to send out a termination notice for not being available for those inspections.
So having looked at the tenant's rights and responsibilities, which is that was very clear. Now, throwing it to the landlords, what would be, from your point of view and from what CCLS does, the obligation of landlords?
Okay, so the landlord is supposed to keep the place habitable, and that meaning the housing quality standards. They're supposed to keep that house habitable for the tenant. They're also supposed to comply with the housing assistance payment contract and the lease, and they need to comply with their management, whatever given notices and such to the tenant. If they want to come into the dwelling, it's a 24-hour notice. If they want the tenant to vacate, like I said earlier, it's a 90-day notice. They need to serve any documents that they serve on the tenant. Any type of notices they serve on the tenant, they need to serve it on the housing authorities. And as far as, one important issue is they are not to charge the tenants any side payments. They are only supposed to charge the portion of the rent that the tenant has from their housing assistance payment contract, which the housing authority sends out. Now, there are some landlords that will try to make side agreements with tenants so that they can get extra rent payments. However, that is fraud.
This is the first thing that's striking me as, well, that's kind of messed up. So there would be landlords who will want to just take advantage of, you've got a tenant, you're already getting what is the the agreed upon rent. But then on the side, they'll say, I'll let you stay, you owe me $40. Is this what happens?
It happens in a lot of cases. They will say that they are going to take the negotiated rent, but then they will try to get an agreement that from the tenant to pay extra money, and it can be like $100 or $200 on the side. And of course, if the tenant does that, then that can be cause for them to lose their voucher as well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're afraid because they're desperate for housing, so they make those agreements sometimes.
I can see why they would. I can't see why the landlord would they're doing pretty well. They're landlords. Do you see, basically, in your great experience of these 34 years with this commitment, the level of landlords, where is it? Is it rather that we have good landlords, or we just don't have good landlords? How are we?
Well, we have to look at it, from our perspective,
Yeah.
because we get the landlords who are not good landlords, pretty much. So
They'll take
So-
advantage of what they can.
Which is what people do.
yes,
So you're like the defender of the tenant, often enough, protecting, sheltering, supporting them in their disputes with landlords.
that's correct.
On the other hand, you have a point here that we wanted to talk about, how Section 8 benefits both tenants and landlords. How does it work? You say it does work both ways.
Okay. So the key feature for the tenant is that it's mobility and portability. The voucher holder can take their voucher to other jurisdictions with public housing authorities. They and they retain their assistance. Like as in other programs, the assistance stays with the unit, but the voucher program is the only program where you can take that with you, and you can take it not only to other counties but to other states. So as long as you are in good standing.
Oh, so help me. We've got about a minute, so maybe this is the last one, but it's interesting me right now. You can take this voucher to another state.
Yes.
What will that voucher say? Like, what is the voucher that you can even bring it to? We're going to move to Oregon.
Okay. So what you would do is you would let the housing authorities know that you want to port out. Okay. So you tell them where you want to port out. Then either you can actually check yourself to the county that you want to port out and see if they're accepted. And then the housing authorities does the paperwork.
Wow.
and then you go ahead and you can move.
We haven't been able, obviously, in our 30 minutes to completely cover all the work you do, but we want to thank both Barbara and Bao for sharing their commitment to helping tenants and landlords to better relate to each other and to help alleviate the problems between tenants and landlords in an economy that is very, very difficult right now. Thank you both very, very much. Hope to have you back another time.
Definitely.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for having us.